What if I told you that Hollywood's greatest love story was actually built on a foundation of desperate lies, wartime panic, and actors who had no idea how their own movie would end? The film that gave us "Here's Looking at You, Kid" and became the gold standard for romantic cinema was nothing short of a beautiful disaster behind the cameras. Casablanca wasn't supposed to be special. It was just another Warner Brothers wartime picture, rushed into production with an unfinished script, recycled sets, and a cast of real-life refugees playing fictional characters. The irony runs deeper than you could ever imagine. The very people portraying evil Nazis were actually Jewish refugees who had fled the real Nazi terror across Europe. While audiences swooned over the romantic chemistry between Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, the truth behind the cameras tells a completely different story. Bogart was uncomfortable with love scenes, Bergman wanted to be in a different movie entirely, and their legendary on-screen romance masked a total lack of personal connection off-screen. The plane that carries Ilsa away in the film's climactic ending? A cardboard cutout. The script that made grown men weep, written day by day with no one knowing how it would conclude. The tears you see during the famous La Marseillaise scene? Completely genuine, shed by actual refugees reliving their own traumatic escapes from Nazi occupation. But the most shocking secret of all might be this: nobody involved in making Casablanca had any idea they were creating what would become cinema's most beloved masterpiece. What you're about to discover will completely change how you watch this classic film forever. The timing of the film's release wasn't coincidental either. Warner Brothers rushed Casablanca into theaters specifically to capitalize on the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942. They wanted to catch the wave of American interest in the exotic Moroccan city that had suddenly become headline news. Little did they know that this opportunistic cash grab would become the most quoted, most analyzed, and most beloved film in Hollywood history. Even the famous nightclub where Rick holds court wasn't what it appeared to be. While Rick's Café Américain looked authentically Moroccan on screen, it was actually one of the few original sets built for the film. Everything else was borrowed, recycled, or completely fabricated due to wartime restrictions. The exotic atmosphere that transported millions of viewers to North Africa was created entirely on a Hollywood backlot, using clever lighting and the magic of cinema to mask the desperate cost-cutting measures happening behind the scenes. The most haunting irony of Casablanca lies in its casting choices. While audiences watched menacing Nazi officers terrorize innocent refugees on screen, many of those Nazi actors were actually European. Conrad Veidt, who played the intimidating Major Heinrich Strasser with such convincing malice, was in real life a passionate anti-fascist whose Jewish wife had escaped Nazi Germany alongside him. Every scene where he terrorized resistance fighters and innocent civilians must have felt like reliving his own nightmare in reverse. Veidt brought an authenticity to the role that came from genuine understanding of Nazi brutality, not from sympathy with their cause, but from personal experience as one of their targets. The casting department at Warner Brothers discovered that European refugees made the most convincing Europeans, but they had no idea how deep this authenticity ran. Many of the extras playing Nazi soldiers, SS officers, and Vichy French collaborators had fled the very regimes they were now representing on screen. During breaks in filming, these actors would share stories of narrow escapes, lost family members, and the terror they'd experienced firsthand. Marcel Dalliot, who played Émile the croupier in Rick's Café, had previously appeared in Jean Renoir's The Grand Illusion, a film that directly inspired the famous La Marseillaise scene in Casablanca. His presence connected the two great anti-fascist films of the era, creating an unspoken artistic resistance network within Hollywood itself. But here's what makes this even more incredible. Only two main characters in the entire film were supposed to be American: Rick and Sam. Every other principal character, from Ilsa to Victor Laszlo to Captain Renault, was European. The casting reflected the reality of wartime America, where Hollywood had become a refuge for European talent fleeing the chaos across the Atlantic. This created an unexpected authenticity that no amount of method acting could have achieved. When these actors portrayed fear, desperation, and the longing for freedom, they weren't acting, they were remembering. The emotional weight that makes Casablanca so powerful wasn't manufactured in script meetings or acting workshops. It was lived experience, channeled through the artificial construct of a Hollywood production into something painfully real and universally moving. Picture this: you're Ingrid Bergman, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and you're filming what will become cinema's greatest love triangle. There's just one problem: nobody, not even the writers, knows which man you're supposed to end up with. This wasn't method acting. This was genuine confusion that somehow created movie magic. The script for Casablanca was literally being written as they filmed it. Each morning, actors would arrive on set to discover new pages, plot twists, and character developments that hadn't existed the day before. Julius and Philip Epstein, along with Howard Koch, were frantically rewriting scenes based on what they'd learned worked the previous day, creating a feedback loop between performance and script that had never been attempted on this scale. Ingrid Bergman found herself in an impossible situation. How do you play a woman torn between two men when you don't know which choice she'll ultimately make? Director Michael Curtis, sensing her frustration, gave her advice that became legendary in Hollywood: just play it in between. This cryptic direction somehow unlocked the perfect performance. Bergman's uncertainty became Ilsa's uncertainty, creating an authenticity that couldn't have been scripted. The chaos extended beyond just the ending. Major plot points were being invented daily. The letters of transit that drive the entire plot, their exact significance kept changing throughout production. Character motivations shifted as writers discovered what worked and what didn't. Some of the film's most famous lines weren't even in the original shooting script. They were born from desperation and improvisation. Producer Hal Wallace became so invested in getting the ending right that he personally wrote Rick's final line to Renault: "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." This wasn't a collaborative screenwriting decision. It was a last-minute addition from a producer who refused to let his film end without the perfect emotional punctuation. The first scene they actually shot was the Paris flashback, which created immediate problems for both Bogart and Bergman. Without knowing how their characters' relationship would ultimately resolve, they had to portray a romantic past that might need to support entirely different emotional conclusions. The result was a complex, layered performance that worked regardless of which ending the writers eventually chose. This scriptural chaos should have destroyed the film. Instead, it created something unprecedented. A movie where every performance felt genuinely spontaneous because in many ways it actually was. The uncertainty that plagued the production became the uncertainty that makes the film's emotional stakes feel so impossibly high. The glamorous world of Casablanca was built on some of the most outrageous movie magic tricks in Hollywood history. That airplane carrying Ilsa away in the film's climactic airport scene, it was nothing more than a cardboard cutout, propped up with miniature crew members positioned around it to create the illusion of a full-sized aircraft through forced perspective photography. Wartime security restrictions made filming at real airports after dark completely impossible. The government feared that film crews with their bright lights and equipment could provide targeting information for potential enemy attacks. So, the entire emotional climax of the film, one of cinema's most famous farewells, was shot on a soundstage with fog machines, creative lighting, and that infamous cardboard plane. The forced perspective trick was so effective that audiences never questioned the aircraft's authenticity. But behind the scenes, crew members joked about the little people hired to stand near the fake plane and make it appear massive. These background performers had to move very carefully to maintain the illusion, turning what should have been simple background work into a precise choreographic challenge. The marketplace where Rick and Ilsa have their crucial confrontation, that was left over from The Adventures of Robin Hood. The hotel corridors where resistance fighters plot their escapes, recycled from a forgotten crime drama. Even the bar where Rick drowns his sorrows was constructed using materials salvaged to maintain the illusion of Bogart's masculine dominance. But the height issue was minor compared to Bogart's deeper discomfort with the role itself. The actor, who would become synonymous with romantic cinema, was genuinely uncomfortable with love scenes, reportedly telling crew members, "I'm not up on this love stuff." His gruff, cynical persona wasn't entirely an act. Bogart found the emotional vulnerability required for romantic scenes genuinely challenging to access. Meanwhile, Ingrid Bergman was fighting her own battle with the studio. She desperately wanted to star in For Whom the Bell Tolls instead of Casablanca, viewing it as a more prestigious project that would better showcase her dramatic abilities. The role that would define her career was one she initially resented taking, adding another layer of authentic tension to her conflicted performance as Ilsa. Paul Henreid, playing the noble resistance leader Victor Laszlo, spent much of the production in a sulk over his third billing behind Bogart and Bergman. He felt his character was essential to the film's political message and deserved equal recognition. This professional resentment actually enhanced his performance. Laszlo's quiet dignity and barely contained frustration reflected Henry's real emotions about his treatment by the studio system. The most quoted line in cinema history wasn't even written for Casablanca. "Here's looking at you, kid," had been Humphrey Bogart's personal catchphrase for over a decade before he ever stepped onto the Casablanca set. He'd used the line in casual conversation, during poker games with friends, and as a standard flirtation technique throughout the 1930s. When the script called for Rick to have an intimate moment with Ilsa, Bogart simply reached into his personal repertoire and pulled out his favorite line. The spontaneous nature of this decision means that cinema's most romantic declaration wasn't crafted by screenwriters to capture perfect romantic sentiment. It was just Bogart being himself, using words that felt natural and comfortable to him. This authenticity is precisely why the line resonated so powerfully with audiences and became endlessly quotable. Producer Hal Wallace became so obsessed with perfecting the film's ending that he took personal control of Rick's final line to Captain Renault. "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship," wasn't written by the Epstein brothers or Howard Koch. It was Wallace himself, working late into the night to find the perfect note on which to end his film. He understood that this final moment needed to promise hope and continuation beyond the story's conclusion. The famous "round up the usual suspects" line has an even more chaotic origin story. The Epstein brothers allegedly came up with Captain Renault's dismissive command while driving to the studio, desperately trying to invent dialogue for that day's shooting. What became one of the most quoted lines in film history was literally conceived during a commute, born from deadline pressure and creative desperation. But the timing behind these immortal lines reveals something even more fascinating about Casablanca's creation. Warner Brothers rushed the film into release specifically to capitalize on the Allied invasion of Casablanca in November 1942. The studio wanted to catch the wave of American interest in this exotic North African city that had suddenly become front-page news across the country. This opportunistic timing meant that lines written in desperation, delivered by uncomfortable actors, and cobbled together from personal catchphrases and late-night producer brainstorming sessions were suddenly being heard by audiences who were reading about the real Casablanca in their morning newspapers. The convergence of fictional dialogue and real-world events created a cultural moment that nobody could have planned or predicted. Behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood's greatest romance, personal dramas were unfolding that would have made excellent material for their own movie. Joy Page, who played the innocent Bulgarian bride Anina, wasn't cast for her acting ability. She was Jack Warner's adopted stepdaughter, making her screen debut through pure nepotism. Her nervous, uncertain performance actually worked perfectly for the character, but the casting decision created tension among more experienced actors who felt they were competing with family connections rather than talent. The first scene shot for the entire film was the Paris flashback sequence, which immediately created problems for both lead actors. Without knowing how Rick and Ilsa's relationship would ultimately resolve, Bogart and Bergman had to portray a romantic past that might need to support completely different emotional conclusions. The uncertainty that plagued the production from day one is visible in their early scenes together. There's a tentative quality to their interactions that accidentally became one of the film's greatest strengths. Bogart's discomfort with romantic scenes created daily challenges for director Michael Curtiz. The actor, who became synonymous with cinematic romance, would frequently break character between takes, making jokes to dispel the emotional intensity required for love scenes. Curtiz learned to work with this tendency rather than fight it, often capturing Bogart's most genuine romantic moments when the actor thought the cameras weren't rolling. Meanwhile, Bergman's frustration with being assigned to Casablanca instead of her preferred project manifested in perfectionist behavior on set. She would request multiple takes of scenes, partly from professional dedication, but partly from a desire to prove that she deserved more prestigious assignments. This perfectionism elevated every scene she appeared in, but it also extended shooting schedules and increased production costs. Paul Henreid's ongoing billing dispute affected his relationships with other actors throughout production. He felt that his character's political importance should have earned him equal star treatment, and he wasn't shy about expressing this opinion. The tension actually enhanced his performance as the noble but slightly stiff resistance leader, creating character dynamics that the script alone couldn't have achieved. Nobody involved in making Casablanca expected it to become anything more than a typical wartime drama. Warner Brothers saw it as just another production designed to capitalize on current events, a quick cash grab based on newspaper headlines about the Allied invasion of North Africa. The studio's expectations were so modest that they allocated a standard B-picture budget and rushed it through production without any special marketing campaign or prestige treatment. The film's journey to classic status began with an unexpected obstacle: international censorship. Ireland banned Casablanca until 1945, claiming it portrayed Vichy France and Nazi Germany in a sinister light that could damage diplomatic relationships. This censorship actually helped the film's reputation. Forbidden art always generates more interest than readily available entertainment, and the Irish ban created an aura of political importance around what had been intended as simple escapism. This college cult status introduced Casablanca to new generations who hadn't experienced World War II firsthand. For these younger viewers, the film's wartime context became historical background rather than current events, allowing them to focus on the timeless elements of romance, sacrifice, and moral choice that transcend any specific political moment. The Harvard screenings revealed something fascinating about the film's construction. It worked equally well as contemporary drama and historical artifact. Students in the 1960s found Rick's cynicism and ultimate redemption as relevant to their own political moment, as audiences in 1942 had found it relevant to theirs. The film's themes proved universal enough to resonate across completely different generational experiences. What nobody anticipated was how Casablanca's quotable dialogue would infiltrate everyday language. Lines that had been written in desperation during wartime production became part of American conversational vocabulary. "Here's looking at you, kid. Round up the usual suspects and play it again, Sam," which isn't even accurate. The actual line is, "Play it, Sam," became cultural references that transcended cinema, appearing in everything from political speeches to casual conversation. This linguistic infiltration happened organically, without marketing campaigns or corporate promotion. The film's dialogue was simply so memorable and emotionally resonant that it became part of how Americans expressed themselves, creating a feedback loop where cultural familiarity bred increased cultural significance. When the cameras rolled on that scene, something extraordinary happened that no script could have captured. The extras singing La Marseillaise weren't just acting. Many of them were actual refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe, reliving their own experiences of loss, hope, and defiance. The tears you see streaming down their faces during the song are completely genuine, shed by people who had lived through the very experiences they were now portraying. This authenticity created a feedback loop that elevated the entire production. Real emotion infected fictional situations, making everything feel more immediate and important than typical Hollywood drama. The line between performance and reality became so blurred that audiences could sense the genuine feelings beneath the scripted dialogue, even if they couldn't articulate exactly what made the film feel so powerfully authentic. The original play that became Casablanca, Everybody Comes to Rick's, was purchased by Warner Brothers the day after Pearl Harbor, not because they recognized its artistic potential, but because they knew war stories would suddenly become profitable. This opportunistic decision accidentally acquired what would become the foundation for cinema's most beloved masterpiece, proving that sometimes the most important artistic decisions are made for completely non-artistic reasons. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more accidental. As Americans grappled with their country's entry into World War II, Casablanca offered them a vision of how individual moral choices could matter in the face of overwhelming political forces. Rick's journey from cynical neutrality to active resistance mirrored America's own transformation from isolationism to engagement, but this parallel emerged from coincidence rather than conscious planning. What started as a desperate wartime production, cobbled together from recycled sets and unfinished scripts, somehow captured something eternal about human nature under pressure. The chaos that should have destroyed the film instead created space for authentic emotions to emerge, resulting in a movie that feels simultaneously artificial and completely real, exactly like the experience of living through historical moments that feel too dramatic to be true, yet are undeniably happening.